Welcome to the Will and Dave Show.
Welcome to the show, folks. This is officially no longer the Will and Dave Show. It's now the Will and Hannah Show. I am grateful beyond belief to have somebody who's not a Smith on the show. It's an amazing honor. I have known Hannah for several years. I was actually earlier, I was in the green room with her and we were talking about it. It's been about 8 years or 7 years I've known her, and most of it has revolved around music. And about a month ago, I read a blog and she had written it, and it piqued my interest. It made me examine some things that I had felt and said up until that point. So I thought, hey, why don't I invite her on the show? So I did. I invited her on, and surprisingly, she said yes. Now, I'm going to have to go back a little bit and say that I've been working on this intro for about an hour, and it seems every time I do it, it seems like a proposal. She said yes. That's not how I mean it. I promise. That's not the intention of the show. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Hannah Bemis. Hey, Hannah, welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, Dave. I can't hear you right now.
Oh, that's because I was muted. Is that better?
There you go. Yes,
hey, Hannah.
That's better. Hi.
Welcome to live TV.
Yes.
So when did we first meet?
Here. I think you're right. I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago. And for a long time, I was just telling you I knew you as Allie's dad. Yep. Your daughter, Allison, went to church with me, and she was one of our favorite people in general, but babysitters especially. She's amazing with just people, but with our kids, They love her. But yeah, known you, like you said, in the music realm mostly, serving on the worship team and doing lots of music stuff at church. But love your family.
So I do research for the show, and usually for me, what that means is I go on Facebook and I do a bunch of Facebook stalking. Mm-hmm. And I found some pictures. First, your wonderful family.
Yes.
They're amazing.
That's us.
That is you. That's you and your husband, Jordan. Mm-hmm. Which hopefully he's not watching yet, because we're going to throw him under the bus a little bit.
Oh, awesome. Love it.
So explain this one, if you would. I don't know what it is. I didn't look at dates.
Yeah, so we're at Mobius, the children's museum in town.
Yes.
And I mean, if we're going to bring the kids there, we might as well have fun too. So the kids were off playing, and we went to the craft center and made our own hats at Mobius and then posed. I think that was a Halloween night at the children's museum. So it was fun.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Explain this one.
That was a bingo night at my kids' school. And again, it gets boring. So we have to make ourselves have a little bit of entertainment. And Jordan, that's just him. I thought we were doing a nice picture, and he had other ideas. So.
And this one?
How do I explain that? I don't know. That's just, I think, probably how I felt that morning. I think I took that picture sharing with my friend Candy, who had just moved to Florida, and I was telling her how cold it was where we were. It was way too
We were
cold.
all sad when they moved to Florida.
Yes, we were.
Explain the mustache.
Can we explain the mustache? I can. Anybody explain Jordan with a mustache?
He's not old enough to be like a 70s mustache. So
he looks like a creepy guy from, I don't know, a 1980s crime show.
And this was your reaction to the mustache, I take it?
Yeah, about right. About right. That's pretty perfect. Yeah.
Oh, man. It was one that... So I love your family. I work with Jordan on the board of the church, and really enjoyed that. I don't know your kids very well, except Allison does. And Allison has great things to say about your kids, which much mean that you guys are great parents, even though I haven't really met your kids. Is that a horrible thing to say?
No, I would love for you to assume that we're great parents from what you've
Oh, there
heard
you go.
about
Okay,
me.
good.
Please assume that.
And the pictures, I think, I was going through Facebook looking at the pictures, and it looks as because your kids are a lot of fun. So
They are. They take after their dad. They're pretty awesome.
I would say you're a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So the blog. So I read the blog about a month ago, and when I went looking at the episodes, it's a relatively new thing, is it not?
Yes, I have written forever, but
Right.
the blog is something that has been kind of, I guess, percolating and being stirred up inside me for a while. I had a blog when my kids were small, and it was just more of a kind of a mommy blog where I just blogged funny things that the kids did. Sometimes it went a little deeper into faith themes, but mostly it was just like, this is what being a mom is, huh? Okay, let's write about it, and maybe I'll survive. But this is something, this blog here, it doesn't have a title. It's just on medium.com under my name,
Right.
but it's just a space where I can process a lot of the things that God is teaching me right now in this crazy season of life that we're all living in. And it kind of runs along the themes of faith, sometimes a little bit of how faith intertwines with politics, with the church and the shape it's in right now, and how well I feel like I fit in it or don't fit in it, and just kind of all those things.
It was really interesting for me, as obviously, our show is usually about politics or something or events. And for me, I look at it usually, hopefully, through the lens of faith. And it's hard to do when you're wrapped up in the emotion of the election or of COVID or you name the event. And it was really interesting as I read your blog, the first one, the one that this picture was, I believe it was called "You're the Daughter of a Divorced Church," right?
That's right. Yeah.
And it really hit home, as I'm a believer. I'm usually right of center, and yet there was a lot of things happening that I can't identify with, obviously. And how do we balance that? And you worded it very well.
Thank you.
It was just really good. You introduced yourself as, I don't know if I need stronger glasses. The end of it says, I don't know who to trust. Would you phrase that in a way for our listeners?
Yeah.
What does that mean? I don't know who to trust.
I think that sentiment right there is what finally pushed me to start writing again, or start my own space, my own blog. And it was just this feeling of kind of, I guess, political homelessness, or political homelessness in the context of church and faith, not feeling like I know where I belong, feeling like there are these issues that I care about that are suddenly, or maybe always, but especially lately, align with more of a left-leaning person. And these issues that I care deeply about that are maybe associated with conservative politics. And there was this pressure that I felt, certainly on social media, but even in the church, to choose and to be one or the other. And I didn't feel like I could. There are people, and Christian people, that I love and trust on both sides of the aisle. And it maybe helps to explain for those who don't know that my husband works in a nonprofit helping to resettle refugees. And so there are amazing people who care so deeply about immigration and about people of color. And those are the things that get their heart beating. And certainly those are biblical things and things that God cares about. And then, in the context of the church background I have, people care about pro-life and about fighting against abortion and about other really solid biblical things that are also I'm passionate about these things, but why can't there be both? And especially in the context of when we had to choose a president, who are we to choose if we are passionate about those things, both of those things? And it was no longer so clear cut for me. And I didn't always know whose voice to trust.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned the aisle and abortion, as those are obvious, those are lightning rod things.
Yeah.
And yet they're not. It just isn't cut and dried. There are people on the right and left who are for and against, if it's abortion or gay rights or any one of any number of these issues. And yet hopefully as a believer, our heart is for everybody.
Yes.
It's reaching over any aisle or any amount of separation in between us. There shouldn't really be any, and yet there is. So I read your blog, and it was an eye opener. I get angry. That's my expression. I don't write. I get angry. I started a YouTube show so I could argue with my son. You write, which is probably a better thing. It's how do we reach across the aisle, or how do we? If it's abortion is an easy one, although look at medicine, for all, or healthcare for all, How do we look at these as a believer, and it's not a right or left issue? How do we do it as a believer? And I'd be interested in your viewpoint. How do we do that as a believer?
I think that part of the answer is in honestly what you and your son are doing right with this show is find somebody who believes differently than you do about one of these issues or all of these issues and start a relationship with them. And it's easy for you because you have a relationship with him, with you and Dave are father and son. Not everyone might have that benefit of being in a family where there are differing viewpoints. A lot of us were raised in kind of a vacuum or a bubble where everyone around us believes the same thing. So it's shocking when we meet, especially another Christian who, what, you don't always vote this way, or what, you feel this way about, abortion or healthcare or gay rights or any of these hot button issues. But it's so powerful to hear someone else's story and just ask questions and listen without an agenda of trying to argue your point necessarily, but just start with just listening. Like, have a conversation over coffee with somebody who votes differently than you and just hear their story, their background, why. I think that's where we start.
Have a coffee with somebody who doesn't agree with us? That's a novel concept. You heretic, you need to find another church. I'm going to vote you out.
Good thing I have a guy on the board that I know.
Oh, right. So on the screen, and you wrote an article for Open Bible, who is our parent organization at the church. And would you go into that a little bit? Is that as well? It was at the election, I believe, if I remember correctly. What was your viewpoint in that article?
So that was a kind of a little bit more about what we were just talking about, but it was it was prior to the election that I wrote that article, and I just felt convicted in myself about the past ways and habits I'd had in voting without thinking. I didn't feel guilty that I had voted for any certain person or any certain party, but I felt guilty and convicted that I had voted without doing any kind of research or deep thinking or even just looking through the Bible to make sure I knew that I was truly voting the way that I was called to vote for this season and this time. And what was great about the last two elections is that they jolted me out of my apathy. I could not care anymore. I couldn't not pay attention. And I think that was true for a lot of Christians. I think it kind of shocked us into awareness, those of us who weren't already aware or conscientious in our voting habits. And so the article was just kind of challenging other people who are like me, who vote out of habit because we're just told that this party is the Christian party, whatever that party may be for you, or these issues are our issues to care about and none of the other ones matter. I just talked about how let's actually dive in and really research first and foremost in the Bible, but let's pray. Let's go into this really being intentional and making sure that we're voting the way that Jesus has called us to vote this time, and just asking God. Let's ask before we vote.
So I read the article, and in your article, you had a number of at the points, you'll have things you should do, and you ended it in prayer. And I thought that is key, that as a believer, we have opinions, we have ideas, we have our druthers, we have our history and how we're told to do things. And really at the end of the day, it should end in prayer. Because that is our guiding, that's our activity. It is how we learn as Christians, if you will. I don't know if that's the right verb, but you know what I mean. It's what we should do.
Yeah.
You also wrote one for, I believe this was after the election one, who has the power. I believe you called it. Is that right? Or am I wording that wrong? The power. Power, wonder, working power. Yes.
After the hymn by that similar, that has that chorus.
Yes. What were you thinking when you wrote this one? What was it? Why'd you write it?
Yeah. So the one that kind of spurred the thought that spurred this blog into motion for me was when I started to hear a lot of Christians voice fears about being persecuted. And, I think the timeline for writing this blog happened, or this particular post was either I think it was during the time when the election was being contested, the election results, and when it looked like President Biden was truly going to be president, but a lot of people weren't sure. And but a lot of the fears that I heard voiced by certain Christian groups were, if there is a liberal in the White House, we are all going to be persecuted, and our liberties, our freedoms are going to be at risk. And in the blog, I was really careful not to argue whether or not that was true, because I don't know what's going to happen. But my point in this post was, why are we so fearful of losing our liberty and really of losing our political sway, influence, power? Why are we so afraid of that? And why have Christians seemingly been so intent on pursuing power in the form of politics? And is that really how Jesus lived? Did he seek out worldly influence or power, or did he seek out and model a different type of power? So that's kind of what I explore in that post.
See, I think it's all about the power. I think you have to have the power, or who are we if we don't have power? I'm being facetious. Please don't hang me for that one, folks, because I don't actually believe that. I believe our power as a believer, it really is in the Savior.
Yeah.
And yet, how do we exist in a world where we have politics? And we have a president who we may or may not like, and we may or may not respect. And how do we exist in that world? And that has been the hardest part for me, as I was not a fan of either candidate. I think a lot of us are in that boat. It was not about the individual. It was about who should I vote for according to my heart and my faith. And it still was not black and white. It still was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. And
I know.
I think I speak for lots of believers when we say the last election and this election as a believer was one of the hardest
Yeah.
that I've ever
Absolutely.
had. It's been miserable. I don't know. For me, my initial reaction in reading yours was like, yes, there's another voice of reason. And yet I read in your blog, and forgive me if I'm wrong, I read a little bit, especially in the last one, in the power, one working power. At the end of it, you sort of left it like, I don't know how to do it. All I know is I need to pray. Is that a fair assessment? Because I know I feel that way, but there is a lot in me. There's a lot of doubt.
Yeah. Yes. And I think so. I think the bottom line is, I don't know how we're supposed to navigate this. I do believe, and I said this in that blog post, that we need to be involved. We can't, I've also seen a tendency in Christianity to just be like, okay, I'm out. Like,
right.
I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to be involved. I'm going to pull my kids out of school. I'm going to pull out. We've got to be in the world, We're
going to move to Canada, aren't
we? We've got to be. Oh man, those words actually came out of my mouth a couple weeks ago. That's convicting right there. But
that's funny.
Yes, yeah. But so I've had that thought. In all fairness, but we have to stay engaged in politics too. And
right.
How do we do that? How do we do that without becoming corrupt? How do we do that without? I think that part of the answer I read in a really great article that I linked in that same blog post was, are we going to lead an engaged culture and engaged politics like Joseph did, or are we going to do it like Daniel did? And kind of the bottom line that author boiled it down to was Daniel continued to challenge his leaders. He continued to challenge the people that were above him. He still had favor. He still was an advisor, but he never abdicated or gave up his role in challenging and confronting and even rebuking when the leaders were out of line. And I think that at times as Christians, we've become so convinced that it's so important to have power in politics that we have abdicated and given up our role as counselors and as honest, convicting accountability for those who are in power that we have influence over. So I think that's a lot of it. But yes,
I want to ask.
Go
I
for
have
it.
to ask you this: you want an honest, humble politician?
Well, that's why I've been writing about Jesus, because I can't.
You
find
must
one.
believe in miracles.
Yeah, that's why I've been writing about Jesus. Yeah.
So in the primaries in the last election, I was voting for Ben Carson because he was the only one in the primaries who I could look up to and respect as a person, as a man who I thought was humble and a man of faith. And he didn't get very far, but it was something that I looked to as maybe he has a few of those qualities. I'm like, I could vote for Ben Carson. It was a lot harder when it got further into that.
Yep.
It's one of the things that it looks as though, for all intents and purposes, now our election is over, and we have a president who is more left-leaning. And so, as a believer, how do we look at the issues which matter to us, i.e. if it be gay rights, if it be or gay marriage, or gender equality, or abortion, or healthcare, the good side? I don't want to only mention the things that we argue about, except obviously there are things which are good. How do we move ahead as a believer that we know in 4 years it's going to be some push and pull in this? How do we live? In your humble opinion, of course.
Right. That's such a good question. I think that our role as believers over the next 4 years is to continue to know what we stand for. And I actually just put out a new blog post. I haven't shared it yet, but it's on there if you go to the Medium site under my name. And it's about, what are we fighting for? What are our causes that matter? What are the things Jesus fought for and advocated for? And again, they don't fall neatly into party lines. There's some on both sides that are really solid and that need our voice. And I think we need to figure out what those are for us, which ones God is asking us to use our voice for, and then find creative ways over the next 4 years to engage those issues. And it's not always going to look like, sometimes it might look like, writing your senators, writing the president, engaging that way, protesting, things like that we think of. But it might be prayer. Jesus did that. And sometimes he fought by, loudly protesting, overturning tables, confronting people face to face. Sometimes he advocated by pulling away and praying and fasting for 40 days. So we have to, number one, I think, ask what are the issues that Jesus would have us fighting for? And number two, how is he asking us to fight for those things? Is it by raising our voice, or is it by pulling away and going into some deep prayer over these things? But we can continue to engage politics and culture and engage in the ways that God wants us to. He gave us our voices, and we're supposed to use them. It's just a matter of how.
Right. You have a fan.
I have a fan.
You have a fan.
You mean other than my mom or my husband?
I have to find a way to get it on the screen, but it's not showing up on the screen. You have a fan, but I can't make it show on the screen. Hold on a second. I'll return to live mode, see if it'll go in here. Add it to the broadcast, and it doesn't add to the broadcast. It says Hannah is awesome.
Oh,
this is a bug. Oh, there it is.
It's my husband. Oh, it's my sister.
It's your sister.
That's awesome. Thanks, Deb.
So anybody who is interested in asking Hannah anything or questions, we would like you to stump her, add them in the comments. I will... it's Hannah's sister. She says that now. It's Hannah's sister. Hi, Hannah's sister.
Hi, Deb.
It's a rough season as a believer. It's a rough season for anybody.
Yeah.
But it's really hard on believers who straddle. It's easy for those of us who are either all the way right or all the way left. It's sort of easier. You can sort of you can justify anything if you're an extremist all the way out there. It's a lot harder if you want to reach across and say, how do we find middle ground when it comes to these huge issues? How do we do it?
Yes, there's what do I call him? He's an author, he's a preacher, he's amazing. His name's Will Ford, but he talks about that. He talks about, I've got friends on the radical right and I've got friends on the radical left. And he says, I want to be in the radical gap. I want to be able to see people on both sides. I know, he's amazing. You should look him up, Will Ford.
I will.
But he says there's people I love on both sides. There are God things on both sides. I want to be able to pull from both and stand in the gap. And sometimes that means that we're going to take hits from the right and hits from the left. But if that's where we're supposed to be, then that's where we want to be. Right. And that's where I want to be.
So for me and for the show, it's one of our comments of our feelings is we hate the statement, well, I'll agree to disagree. Is that so passive aggressive? It's this feeling that you're wrong and that's okay. I'll live with you being wrong was sort of what it says. And it's really hard not to say that for huge issues, i.e. abortion or healthcare or these where there are such strong feelings about it. And I don't know. It usually ends up in prayer. For those of us of faith, you say, okay, I got to leave. I got to go back. I need to work this out here first and then with somebody else, as I think that it is really easy got to get lost in the emotions of, how could you vote for Trump or for Harris and Biden? How could you vote for them because of XYZ? Well, because that's what I felt the Lord say to do. And that it sort of absolves us in a sense. And in my head, that's a little bit of a cop out. Well, it's what God said to do, so it's God's fault,
Yeah, you can't argue with that.
Yeah, it gets hard to, but it's how I do it. It's how I voted in the last election and in the one before that, and it's not an easy thing to do. And
Yeah,
so I want to say,
maybe
yeah.
just instead of the agree to disagree, we can just say, okay, well, let's agree to stay in relationship. Let's agree to keep talking, keep dialoguing. And with God, let's keep talking to God about where we're supposed to be in all this. And let's keep talking to each other, keep staying in relationship with the people who believe radically different from us.
Yeah. Have a cup of coffee, somebody who doesn't agree with you. I think that's awesome advice. Well, Hannah, I want to say thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
I loved it. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, for those of you who want to catch the replay, it will be on YouTube and on Facebook and on our website at thewillanddaveshow.com. And other than that, Hannah, thank you very much. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks.
We will see you Sunday morning.
Yeah, see you then.
Okay, bye-bye.